to the Climate Layer, where we make sustainability simple and misinformation extinct. I'm Alex Bonat, and before we dive into today's topic, I want to share a bit about why I started this podcast. I've been involved in sustainability and clean energy since I graduated college. I really joined the sector when I started working with utilities, building EV education programs and charging infrastructure across New England. Then I pivoted into PR, where I became a subject matter expert in clean transportation, climate communications, and renewable energy. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was spending more time talking about climate solutions rather than building them. That's why I'm now finishing my master's in sustainability at Harvard, and also why I started the Climate Layer. My goal is simple. It's to cut through the noise, bust the myths, and make sustainability something we can all understand, without the politics, without the spin. But more than that, I want to untangle the fear, the guilt, and the overwhelm. Because behind every piece of climate misinformation is an emotion, a worry that it's too late, it's too hard, or too expensive to change. This show is here to challenge those stories, not just with facts, but with clarity, compassion, and a little bit of hope. So let's get into it. Let's start with a fact that surprises almost everyone. The first successful car in the United States wasn't actually powered by gasoline. It was electric. In 1894, two engineers, Henry G. Morris and Pedro G. Salom, built the Electrobat, a steel-framed electric car powered by lead-acid batteries. It looked like a mini streetcar, weighed over 4,000 pounds, and had a top speed of about 20 miles per hour. But it worked, and it was getting drivers from point A to point B. In 1897, Morris and Salom had launched a fleet of electric taxis in New York City. These weren't prototypes. They were commercial vehicles, competing with horse-drawn cabs. Quiet, clean, and easy to operate. No hand cranking, no exhaust, no noise. And they weren't alone. By the early 1900s, electric cars were more popular than gasoline cars in many cities. They were especially favored by people who wanted a reliable, low-maintenance way to get around without the mess and muscle of a gas engine. So what happened? Gasoline was cheap, internal combustion engines got better faster, and another thing to keep in mind, coal was dirty. Soot, smoke, ash. Gasoline looked cleaner. It burned without the grime, and it felt modern. That perception helped it win. And then came the tipping point, infrastructure. Gas stations started popping up. Roads were built for speed and distance. Batteries couldn't keep up. And the oil industry, already booming from kerosene and industrial fuels, saw an opportunity to dominate personal transportation. Then came World War I, and after that, World War II. Oil became a strategic asset, powering industrial and military transportation and supply chains. After the war, the U.S. doubled down. We built highways, suburbs, and a car culture that made oil the default. And it didn't stop with cars. Planes, ships, freight, global trade runs on oil. Today, over 90% of transportation energy worldwide still comes from petroleum. That includes gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, bunker fuel, used for ships like cargo ships, oil tankers, container ships. They're all derived from crude. But here's the kicker. Oil doesn't power our homes. It barely touches the electric grid. In the US, oil accounts for less than 1% of electricity generation. So when we talk about oil, we're talking about movement, not lighting or heating. That's why electrifying transportation is such a big climate win. It shifts demand away from oil and toward a grid that's getting cleaner every year. And that's why this history matters, because the story of oil isn't just about fuel. It's about infrastructure, policy, and cultural inertia. We didn't choose gas because it was better. We chose it because we built around it and then forgot we had a choice. So to understand where transportation is headed, we need to understand how oil became king and why it's still holding court. Oil wasn't always the default. In the early 20th century, it competed with coal, steam, and even electricity. But gasoline was cheap, portable, and increasingly refined. As internal combustion engines improved, oil became the fuel of choice, not just for cars, but for global mobility. And as we said, then came the World Wars. And World War II, oil wasn't just useful, it was strategic. The U.S. ramped up production from 3.7 million barrels per day in 1940 to 4.7 million by 1945. Pipelines like the Big Inch and Little Big Inch were built to move crude and refined product from Texas to the East Coast, bypassing U-boats and fueling the Allied war effort. To manage this massive supply chain, the government created the Petroleum Administration for War, which later evolved into the Petroleum Administration for Defense Districts, or PADDs, PADs. These 5 regional hubs, Gulf Coast, Midwest, East Coast, Rocky Mountain, and West Coast, still shape how oil moves across the U.S. today. After the war, oil didn't slow down. It powered the post-war boom. Highways, suburbs, aviation, shipping, and for decades, the fear was that we'd run out. That was the logic behind peak oil, the idea that global production would hit a ceiling and then decline. It shaped energy policy, geopolitical strategy, and public anxiety for years. But then came hydraulic fracturing. The technique had existed since the 1940s, but it wasn't until the 2000s, especially between 2010 and 2016, that fracking combined with horizontal drilling to unlock vast shale reserves. By 2016, fracked wells accounted for half of U.S. crude oil production. The fear of scarcity gave way to a new problem: abundance. So, what does the future hold? Oil's grip on transportation is still strong, especially in aviation and shipping, but the transition is underway. Light-duty vehicles are shifting towards electrification. EVs are scaling fast, supported by cleaner grids and better batteries. Medium and heavy-duty trucks are exploring multiple paths. Battery electric trucks are gaining traction for short-haul routes. Hydrogen fuel cells may play a role in long-haul freight, but only if infrastructure catches up. And then biofuels and renewable diesel are also contenders, especially in fleets and agricultural transport. Aviation is turning to sustainable aviation fuel, otherwise known as SAF. There's no viable electric alternative for long-haul flights, and SAF can drop into existing engines while cutting life cycle emissions. It's not perfect, but it's the best option we've got. The takeaway: oil built the system, but it doesn't have to define the future. The technologies are here. The challenge is scale, policy, and infrastructure. And that's what we'll keep unpacking, one layer at a time. So, one of the most common questions I hear about EVs is this: what happens when there's a blackout? How will I charge my car? It's a fair question, but it's built on a misunderstanding. Not just about EVs, but about how our entire transportation system works. Let's start with the basic. Most EV charging happens at home. If you've got a home charger, you're not topping off at a station every day. You're plugging in overnight and waking up with a full quote-unquote tank. It's like charging your phone: quiet, automatic, and ready when you are. So if the power goes out, chances are your EV is already charged. And unless you're in a prolonged outage, you're not stranded, you're mobile. But here's the twist: gas cars rely on electricity too. Modern gas stations need power to pump fuel, process payments, and operate safety systems. If the grid goes down, most stations go dark. Only those on emergency routes with backup generators or priority restoration can keep running. So the idea that gas cars are immune to blackouts, it's not true. They're just as dependent on electrons. They just hide it behind the pump. Now let's flip the script. If you're an EV owner with solar panels and battery storage, you've got options. You can charge your car during the day, you can store power for nighttime charging, and if your EV supports vehicle to home, also known as V2H, or vehicle to grid, V2G, technology systems, you can even use your car to power your house. That's not science fiction. That's already happening. With models like the Ford F-150 Lightning, Hyundai Ioniq 5, and others, in a blackout, your EV just isn't just a vehicle, it's also a potential backup generator. So yes, EVs depend on the grid, but so does everything else. And when the grid goes down, EVs can be part of the solution, not just another problem. We'll dig into charging levels, infrastructure, and smart grid tech in a future episode, but for now, just remember, EVs aren't fragile gadgets waiting for the lights to flicker. They're part of a bigger system, one that's evolving, one that's getting cleaner, and one that can actually make us more resilient when things go wrong. The fear that electric cars fail in a blackout misses the bigger picture. Our entire transportation system depends on electricity, and EVs give us new tools to manage it. That's the layer we're peeling back today, the way oil built the way we move, and the way electricity is reshaping it. So that's it for episode 2 of The Climate Layer. Today we traced how oil became the backbone of global transportation, from the first electric taxis in New York to the rise of gasoline in highways, to the way oil still dominates planes, ships, and freight. We looked at how abundance replaced scarcity and how electrification is starting to chip away at oil's grip. And we closed by tackling one of the most common fears about EVs: what happens when the power goes out? The takeaway: oil built the way we move, but electricity is reshaping it. EVs aren't fragile. They're part of a bigger system that's evolving, getting cleaner, and even making us more resilient when things go wrong. Next time, we'll slow down and unpack the grid itself, how it works, how it's changing, and why it's the backbone of the energy transition. If this episode sparked questions or ideas, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, leave a review, or pass this along to someone curious about the future of energy, sustainability, electrification. So, until then, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep peeling back the layers.